I'm super excited to be back with this crowd. I was just telling my breakout team, I used to be in the DC area. I love the Agile community in the DC area. And I know this is we've gone beyond that now with COVID. So we have a lot of people who are outside of the area here, but it's just great to be back and to see some of you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey at the place that I work currently, which is called Singlewire. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what we do. From project to product. And actually, I'm going to start before project. And it's really a case study that is in process. I've been working specifically on the product strategy side of things for the past 6 to 9 months, a little bit more concertedly, but I've been working on our transition from waterfall to agility and beyond since I started here about 5 years ago. So let me talk a little bit about what my journey has been, and then in turn, where we are with Singlewire. Here we go. I am Singlewire's Vice President of Software Development, and I also teach a capstone class at UW-Madison. And that's a pretty fun class. It's for undergraduate juniors and seniors. And what we do is we partner with companies like Capital One in your area and others, and they come up with a project and they give the students mentors. And then what I do is I layer on how do you collaborate as a software development team? How do we Agile? What is Scrum? But I start actually a little bit before that, and we talk through things like Lean Startup and design thinking, and how do we figure out what to build, not just how do we build it. So those are the two things that are taking up most of my time work-wise right now. But in the past, I've worked for Capital One Labs. I was their head of operations before I moved back to Wisconsin. I worked at O-Power, as I mentioned, and was heading up their Agile program management office. We were using a scaled Agile framework that was very similar to the Spotify model. Many of you are, I'm sure, familiar with that. That was a lot of fun because I loved the fact that we were using behavioral science to get people to save energy, which is near and dear to my heart. But I started my career as a software developer working for IBM, and then kind of switched over the project management realm, got really excited about the Agile space, really because of LitheSpeed, because I went to one of Sanjeev's classes and started drinking the Kool-Aid after that, and I've never gone back. So that's where I come from. And where I am right now is Singlewire. So Singlewire is a pretty small company, but what I would tell you maybe 6 to 9 months ago is that we make a mass emergency notification system. So really what we do, and we still do this, but we make it really easy for you to pick up any device in front of you, cell phone, a desk phone, your desktop, and send a notification to anyone you need to at your business or at your school or at your hospital. And it'll pop up on any device that they have in front of them. So all 3 of those that I just mentioned, but also overhead speakers. If you think of a K through 12 school, or digital signs, maybe there's signs out in the stadium, you name it. We've got customers in that segment, and we were focused on mass emergency notification until we kind of ran through this process that I'm going to talk about today, and realize that really what we need to build, what our customers need, is a facilities-based critical event management system, which is similar. We still work really, really well with on-premise devices for schools and hospitals. But instead of just focusing on the mass emergency notification piece, we're looking at how do we help customers stay safe throughout an event. So if you think about tornado, like a tornado warning, or even a drill at a school, how do you find out that there's a tornado? How do you notify people? How do you keep them safe and updated? And how do you collaborate within your school or company during the event? And then, how do you document what happened afterwards? And so we're really focused on the whole process now. And I'll talk about really today, like how we got to that singular vision and what steps we took along the way. That's Singlewire. And so that's kind of the backdrop for what I'll be talking about today. There's 2 sides to having a focused product strategy, right? There's actually having that strategy, and then there's also being able to execute against it. And so as I talk about our journey at Singlewire, I'm going to talk about those 2 kind of, how we took different steps. First, there's a step toward enhancing our strategy, and then there's a step toward executing against that strategy. And we kind of step forward like this. So basically every other slide is going to be strategy, then execution, because I like to talk about logistics and I like to get into the nitty-gritty details of the processes we use and how we did this. So here's our evolution. And I'll start with around the time that I started 5 years ago, which I call the BA era, not BC, but BA stands for Before Agile. When I started at Singlewire, we were very much doing still a waterfall process. And one of the reasons why we were doing that was because our early success as a company was very much tied to our integration with the Cisco phone system. So we integrated with Cisco, and any school or hospital or anyone who had that system would be able to have a really nice clean tie between the phones and the notifications that would go out, say, over their PA systems. And so we would follow the Cisco process, and we would release when Cisco was releasing, which happened to be maybe once a year or once every year and a half. It was a very long process. And we had to section off a lot of time for QA, because being an emergency notification system means that the system has to work when people need it. So we had a lot of QAers, and shout out to the QA team. We had and still have about a 2-to-1 dev to QA ratio, two developers to every one QA, just to make sure that our system works and works well. But back then it was a waterfall process. We didn't even have standing teams. We would form teams around a project. And so we might start one feature with this team, and then we might steal a person. And when we started a new feature, and like pull them over because they had like certain skills that we needed. And that's how we were running things. And it worked pretty well for a while until we had to scale a little bit beyond just a couple of teams at a time. When I had started, we had a very rudimentary a team called the product management team. And it really was just the VP of marketing, VP of development, getting together and talking a little bit. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that evolved in an upcoming slide. But we had no product owners because we didn't have standing teams. We had no user experience people paying attention to that. We had no one going out from the dev team and talking to customers on a regular basis. But what we did have, and this is a huge asset, was we had great people who worked together and had worked together for a really long time and were really good at communicating with each other. And that's how this whole thing worked well, is because we had that interpersonal glue, which is the basis for a great agile culture. So it was good for me to come into this environment, because sometimes when you start in an organization, I'm sure all of you know this, depending on where their minds are at, depending on where the culture is, you'll get a lot of pushback in terms of some of the changes that you want to make and that sort of thing. But in this case, I was accepted with open arms, because I think that they hired their first project manager a little bit too late, and they desperately needed some changes. And so it was actually pretty easy for me to come in and, introduce things like Jira and standing teams and that sort of thing. But this is what we were starting with. So it's not even from project to product, it's from pre-project to product is really what our journey is about. And that rudimentary product strategy team that I was just talking about on the last slide, where we had 2 VPs that got together, what that really looked like was they would get together every so often and just talk about customer feature requests. So they would gather them up from sales or marketing or wherever they were hearing these requests, and they would just talk about them, with each other and decide, does this bubble up? In our opinions, does it bubble up to the top to be part of our roadmap, of which we didn't really have one at the time? This is what you're looking at is kind of it, or did it not? And they realized very quickly they needed some sort of way to have some capacity planning. And so this spreadsheet, which I listed as being deprecated in April 2018, but I do want to say we stopped using it long before that. That's just when I archived this document. You can see, because we didn't have standing teams, we were trying to figure out, okay, how many devs and how many QA do we need for each of these projects, and how long do you think it'll take? Each line in the spreadsheet is one person. And so they were pretty small teams, but we had this rudimentary process for trying to figure out what our capacity was and what our strategy was based on what our customers were asking for, which is a fine start. I was happy that we had this much to begin with. So then I could come in and start making some changes on the execution side. So one of the first things that we did was institute standing teams, and we kind of beefed up our DevOps team. I hired a product manager from within, a developer who had basically acted like a product manager without knowing he was acting like a product manager in one of our bigger projects. I saw something in him, and I'm still very happy that we pulled him over the product management side, got him trained up, got him going. We hired a UX lead. And we shortened up our release cycle tremendously. So instead of every 9 months or every year and a half, now we release every 6 weeks on the dot. And we have this pre-planned release schedule. And the features, if they're going to be done for a release, they're going to be done and they get released. If they're not, they get pushed to the next release. The team started using Scrum and Kanban, and I say Scrum-ish because, as all of you know, it takes a while to get people up to speed and really using the various agile processes that we know work really well. And then every company is going to have their own flavor. And we still have our own flavors of some of these things, but at least we're using some of these basic techniques. And the project started to flow to the teams instead of the teams flowing to the projects, which was a great starting point from an execution perspective. And so once we got our project realm like ticking and it's running really, really nicely, then what we needed to do was kind of beef up our strategy side of the process. So again, like one step forward on strategy, one step forward on execution, then another step forward on strategy. And we formed this group that I call the Product Council. And so it was kind of a beefed up version of that first product management team where we had the 2 VPs talking. We now had representation from all of our different departments. So we had some sales, marketing was still there. We got a few more people from development, including architects. We had our product manager. We had support and customer success at the table. And now, instead of just talking about the various features that we were hearing about in sales, we're talking about all of the issues that are coming up throughout the company. So we're talking about what is support and customer success hearing, what kinds of tech debt do we really need to work on? Those sorts of things were missing from the original conversation and just kind of like shoehorned into the roadmap when needed. But now we're having concerted conversations, and the agenda for this group was still pretty rudimentary. You know, it was, do we have any ad hoc high-level strategy concerns? Let's bring them to the table and let's talk through what we want to do. Do we want to integrate with this? Do we want to, pay a little bit more attention to this competitor? Do we want to build this feature that we see that someone else is building? All of those things were brought up, but it was really in an ad hoc fashion. And we were still talking about features and not a North Star or a vision that we're building toward. We're really reactive according to what our customers are asking for and according to what our competitors are doing. So there were other issues with this too. We would meet once a week. So there would be a lot of change on a week-to-week basis. When you've got people basically arguing for the features that they care about or that their customers care about, and not using a lot of criteria, which we weren't in terms of what we should build and what we shouldn't, you end up with too much change. So you end up with a roadmap that, at the end of the Tuesday you met this week, it looks like this. And then a week later, something big comes up and you have to shift some things around. And it's just that much change is not very healthy. And it happened because we didn't have that kind of overarching vision for where we wanted to go as a group and a team and a company. And I wouldn't say that we didn't have any of that. We did have annual planning. We did have a vision every year that would include things like, oh, we want to diversify into Europe, or we need to protect our customers, so we want to move them from one of our products to another one, which we're building more features in. But I would say the nitty-gritty of like what gets included on the roadmap wasn't fully connected to what our kind of overarching vision was. We weren't using data to make any of our decisions, and we just had a lot of people who would get around and decide things by committee, which is not always the healthiest thing to do. It was way better than what we started with. And I always, at every step of this process, and even today, am very grateful for the fact that we've got people who are willing to change and try something new, but recognize that at this point, like there's still some improvement that we could make. So what did we do next? Well, about 9 months ago, was it? Last July, the VP of marketing decided to retire, and our VP of development, who had formed that original product management team, with him had also retired. So they both left, and we had a chance to kind of break up some of what we had been doing and try a few new things. And this is what we've moved to over the past 6 to 9 months. The first thing that we did was we pulled a ton of data, and we really made great strides in becoming a much more data-driven company. And so what I have our various departments do every quarter, if not more often if we need it, is develop their own reports based on data. So we get a report from sales, for example, that talks about, why are we losing deals, or why are we winning deals? What are they hearing from our customers? We get a report from customer success and support that talks about what are people calling in most often about, which features are really tripping them up, where could the UI use a little bit of love in terms of making it more intuitive and easier to use. We get a report from marketing talking about what are our competitors doing, what are they releasing, who's acquired whom, what does the market look like that we want to go after, and then we get a report from product, which talks about how are customers using our system, what features are they using, how quickly after we release something is it ramping up amongst our customer base, what verticals are using it, where might we have to make some changes based on the customer interviews that we've been having. And we pull all of this data together, and we use it in a couple of ways. We share it with the entire company, and I still don't see a lot of participation yet, except for little pockets of the company. But the idea is that I want to hear from anyone and everyone that sees something interesting in this data, that thinks that we should pay attention to it. And so I'm hoping to build more of a culture of participation. No matter what your job is, if you see something, say something, and we'll talk about, how we correct course if you see something interesting in the data, or new ideas or innovative ideas that you might see that's sparked by this data. So we started with some data. Then we formed a new team, and really what we call it is the product strategy team. And it's very similar to the product council in that we have representation from all over the company, except we slimmed it down just a little bit so we could talk a little bit more high level and make decisions more easily based on this data. So what we do is we meet quarterly and we review this data. The data gets sent out ahead of time. People have a chance to review it, come up with questions. We discuss it. And then we talk about really high level strategy. And this is where we've really formed the basis for kind of our North Star and vision, where we want to go in the future, is by getting this group of folks together and having those discussions and talking about what we're seeing in the market based on the data, and not just based on what we're hearing from 1 or 2 customers. Once we kind of had that high level strategy, I'll talk about what that is. And it took, it took quite a while of discussions with this group and other people across the organization to really hone in on the fact that, we're no longer a mass emergency notification company. What we really are is a facilities-based critical event management company. This is what we've been building toward, but we haven't given it a name. And this is where the market is going. And this is where we think that our niche really is, that facilities-based piece. We do that on-prem piece so much better than our competitors. And it makes so much more sense to be focused on those aspects and building out features that are really going to help our customers there. All of these discussions happened over the course of many months. So it's not like we could get together once, put a rubber stamp on it, agree. No, like this is something that develops over time and kind of has an evolution of its own before we can get this team together and finally say, you know what, this is where we're going. But this team is where that happened. Once we had that high level strategy, we were able to determine for the year, what are our strategic buckets of work that we want to work on? And that then in turn helps identify what features and what projects we're going to do for the rest of the year, because we try to find things that fit within these buckets, fit the high level strategy. And we, just like everyone else, have way more to do than we could ever get done. So what we've actually ended up doing is doing a weighted shortest job first prioritization within these buckets to make sure that we can take what the product strategy team does and fill out our roadmap so that we're always marching toward, with our features, we're always marching toward that vision of being the best facilities-based critical event management system we possibly can. So this team is absolutely key. And we meet once a quarter, but we've also empowered everyone on the team to, at any moment, if they've got something that they think needs to be discussed with the team, to form an ad hoc meeting, and we'll just discuss it. And we've done this around prioritization. We've done this when something, a change happens in the market, maybe something happens big with one of our competitors, we just want to talk about it. Because the world moves pretty quickly, and meeting once a quarter might not cover everything. But in general, we do this on a cadence, and then we kind of cover anything that happens in between on an ad hoc basis.
Amber, we did get one question in the chat, was what sort of guidance, if at all, did you provide to these groups to help them get started with pulling the right data to base insights and decisions?
Oh, that's good. What I did was I talked to a variety of people across the company, including this team and product strategy, our CEO, and some other folks that I had been hearing had been asking for certain data for a while, but we didn't have the capabilities to pull it. And so I started off identifying people from each department that I knew would be really good partners in trying to get this. And I specifically said, here's the type of data that we're thinking about, that we want to get. Can you help us get this? So I kind of crowdsourced it, to be honest. But we have another team that I actually wasn't planning to talk about, but we call it the Data Wranglers team, that consists of a bunch of people. They're all individual contributors from all of our various departments that get together and specifically meet every single week to talk through what data we think we need to help drive better decisions. And so one of the key aspects of getting these reports ready and in figuring out what we needed was iteration. We started with what we thought we needed, and then we presented it to the product strategy team. We got some feedback, and then we came up with more ideas based on some of the things that we talked about wishing we knew. Hey, I wish I knew how many people were using this feature, which we haven't been tracking yet. So that team will go out and go and get that, add it to our reports. And then it's just a continuous improvement on what we had before. But we started with what we, just brainstorming what we wished we had, and then going to find the people who could go out and get us that data, basically.
Thank you for that. And we have one other question. What level are your strategy team members? If not exec, how have you helped execs accept and support strategy being set by non-execs? Well, this is part of your meetup, but you want to address that now?
This is fantastic. So on this team, our CEO is on it. We've got 3 VPs of sales, with 2 VPs of development. Most of us are VPs on this team. So that helps with the convincing your executives to do what you want them to do. But our product manager, head of product, is also on this. And then we've added our principal engineer and our head of support as well. And marketing will be joining us also. So the way that we've done it is really getting them involved and co-creating these the high level strategy and also kind of these strategic buckets. That's a much easier way than having a lower level team meet off to the side and then trying to convince your executives to kind of fall in line with these ideas. I think if we were to grow, it would probably not make sense to have all of the VPs across the board to be in a team like this. In fact, it would not make sense. So what I might think about doing is having the lower level people who really need to make these decisions, including our head of product, head of UX, those sorts of folks who are really, really close to our customers, getting together and come up with a strategy, but then including maybe 1 or 2 of the executive team in that team, the ones who are most influential. And for the most part, we kind of know who that is usually within the organization. Pluck those people, bring them in, have them co-create it, and then make it their job to share out to the rest of the company and get other people on board, other people on your executive team. I think that's the way that I would approach it if we hadn't basically been forming this team around some of our key execs in the first place. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Do you have time for just one more or two-part question before you move on?
Yeah.
Okay, this is about buckets. So when you say strategic buckets of work, is that akin to objectives in an OKR model or actual initiatives?
It's closer to actual initiatives than real objectives. Although I would love it if we would move to down the path to kind of turn these into real objectives. I think if your company is already using OKRs in a really solid way, you're a step ahead of where we're at right now. Right here, it really is buckets of work that we know will help fill gaps in our overarching strategy or help move the needle forward. But they're just buckets and they're filled with projects right now. I'll take the school safety bucket, for example. That really is a collection of features for K through 12 customers right now. We don't have any goals except for the ones around delivery. So we know we want to have a connection between a panic button and it being able to connect directly with the 911 dispatcher. So that's one of the projects we could be working on for school safety, for example. But as far as tracking, like, how many customers do we want using that feature by the end of the year, anything like that? To me, that's the next iteration of where I'd love us to get, is to have a real sense for where do we want to go, one, and then whether we've gotten there or not, and just really kind of iterating along those lines as well. So it's a little bit different for us, but I think if you were to be able to get your executives to use the OKR methodology and then cascade those objectives and key results down and maybe cascade it up once or twice, I think you'd be in better shape. Any other questions?
A little more specific about buckets. How were they cut and sliced? Who was involved in the decisions to cut and slice them? And did they change with frequency, every release, every year, etc.?
Oh my gosh, this is someone who's like been through my pain points already. Not all of us were involved in coming up with these strategic buckets. And if I would have had my choice, it would have been something that we would have done on the product strategy team. But there was a subset of the product strategy team that came up with these. And then we discussed them and agreed that, yeah, these are good buckets for us to be going after. This facilities bucket has changed already this year, or at least right before the turn of the year. It used to be called UCAS, which is a connection with a certain type of phone. But really what it's turned into is more facilities based. Yes, we want to connect with the systems within a school or a hospital, for example, but we also want to connect, we also want to create features that connect other on-premise devices to our notification system and to our critical event management system too. So that one's already evolved a little bit, but after that initial kind of rejiggering of this, after we all settled on these 4 buckets, I really don't foresee this changing for the rest of the year. I think this is what we're going to go after for the rest of the year. We have our vision, these fit it pretty well. And in fact, I would go as far as to say that if these were changing on a quarterly basis or even every 2 quarters, that's probably an indication that something is wrong, either with the buckets or with the strategy itself. So in terms of, I think there's a piece of that question that was about like, how is it sliced and diced? These are not mutually exclusive buckets for us. And there's probably some work that we have to do to figure out how or if we want to make them mutually exclusive. For example, in my mind, school safety is calling out a subset of features that lead into our overarching critical event management strategy. They're pretty much one and the same for me, except for the fact that we're really focused on school safety this year and building up feature sets around schools. And so it's okay in my mind to call that out as one of our major buckets of strategy for the year, because it helps keep people focused on that aspect of it. And, it really just, it's really there to, yeah, I think I already said it, but it's really just there to keep us all on the same page in terms of, when you're prioritizing, if you've got a feature that's going to go into school safety or you've got a feature that's going to benefit hospitals. Well, right now we're really focused on schools. So guess which one gets picked for the roadmap? Things like this help us make that determination. And I found it to be very, very useful to have this kind of framing around it. All right. Anything else for the moment? Once we had this product strategy team and we were kind of, we're getting to be focused around this facilities based critical event management and overarching vision and strategy. The other thing that I'm really proud of us for doing is, and this was a marketing-led effort, was we put together a communications calendar and a cadence to meet every month with folks, again, across the company, but not the same ones that are part of product strategy, the ones that are actually in charge of kind of pushing out our messages, both internally to our employees and externally to our customers. And they've created a calendar around, what theme do we want to talk about every single month? And then what are we going to do to back up that theme? What blog posts are going out? What videos are being created? What are our account managers talking about to customers? What are we building from a product perspective that we can be kind of bragging about, that sort of thing. And like I said, we talk about this once a month, and it's the type of clarity that I'm seeing from being able to get together and map all of this out and know that for the next 3 months, we're really going to be focused on schools, and our roadmap reflects that, and our website reflects that, and our blog post reflects that. To me, it's a really nice feeling because I like simplicity, and I like to be able to have everyone kind of speaking the same language. And so for me, it's really nice to be able to point to our external messaging internally to my teams and say, look, this is what we're building, and we're all in this together, and we're all walking in the same direction, and we're all trying to push for the same things. And so this is how your feature that you're building fits into the overall strategy. This is how it fits in to, what our sales team is talking about, what our marketing team is talking about. And it's just a really nice, succinct message to be able to send. And I think everyone across the organization, including myself, really craves that clarity in terms of how is the work that you're doing contributing to the broader strategy and to keeping our customers safe. So I really like this communications calendar. I wish I came up with it, but I did it, and the marketing team's done a great job of putting it together. And I mentioned this already. The results of all of this, all of these discussions and kind of trying to figure out what our buckets are and then building a communications plan around it, is really just clarity around the fact that we're no longer building this mass emergency notification system only. We're building a facilities-based critical event management system that's really going to help our customers from the very beginning of something, bad in many cases going on, to the end, and help keep them safe. And so logistically, I want to just touch on really quick, like how we take that high level vision and what we've come up with right now and just keep everyone focused on the same thing over time. Because what usually happens in an organization is you might have like an offsite and you'll come up with this amazing vision and everyone will get behind it for all of like 2 hours, and then something will change and people stop speaking the same language. And what do you do to keep them all together? Well, this is what we've put in place that I think is working pretty well to keep everyone on the same page. We have the data reports that flow into the product strategy process, but we also share those with everyone across the company. So everyone's seeing the same data that the product strategy team is seeing and that the product strategy is making decisions based on. Product strategy meets quarterly or on an ad hoc basis, like I said, so they're setting that high level vision. And really every quarter, what we should be doing on that team is making sure that we're staying focused. And part of what I've been doing for the past 6 to 9 months is just reminding that team that that's what we're here for. We're here not to come up with a new product strategy every single time. We're here to double check and make sure that our strategy that we have is still good, to look at the data and make sure that we all agree that the data still supports moving in that direction. And then if all is working correctly, it doesn't change. Like there shouldn't be a whole lot of change there. So we do that quarterly. That feeds into our road mapping process. So the understanding of what our high level vision is and those strategic buckets, that helps the road mapping and scheduling team, which meets every 2 weeks and is located in our product development department, that helps us figure out, all right, what should we really be working on? And how do we schedule this with the teams to get some of our most strategic projects, those ones that are going to fill the gaps that we know we have on this high level vision? How do we get those done as quickly as possible? And then we've got more information that feeds into them and might even bubble up to the product strategy team. So on a bi-weekly basis, we have a feature triage meeting, and this is filled with mostly individual contributors that take a look at the feature request queue every time a customer asks for something, or every time we hear something from customer success, or even internally if we want to work on something kind of big from a tech debt perspective. We put it in a queue in Jira and we look at it every 2 weeks. And most of those features, as they rightly should, they just go in the backlog because most of them don't contribute in a high priority way to our overarching strategy. They might be cool, they might be useful, but if they're not really going to move us forward from that strategic perspective, then they don't take priority over some of the other things that we have on the roadmap that really does contribute to that long-term goal. So one of the reasons I had this team be created with a lot of individual contributors from across the company is that I wanted to check to see if our communication about what the high-level product strategy was actually getting through to folks, and that they actually understood. And so based on, the types of features that they bubble up to the road mapping team or bubble up to the product strategy team, if those don't really align with our overarching high-level strategy, then we probably have a communication problem, or we could have a strategic problem. But the first place I would look is our communication. And so that was part of why I put the focus, or I suggested that we put the folks that we did on that team, is because I kind of wanted to see how that communication was working. We also have a bug triage team that meets twice a week. And they go over more or less things that our development team is finding, but sometimes they'll determine that we've got some big tech debt item or some bigger project that they want to get on the roadmap because it's going to take longer than a couple of weeks. And they'll push those things up to road mapping too. In road mapping, if we have something that we need to discuss at a higher level or a priority mismatch that we just can't solve on our own, we'll call one of those product strategy ad hocs and we'll figure that out. So everything here is interconnected. It happens on a regular basis. Everyone knows what to expect at this point. And I think that we've got a pretty good process for keeping everyone informed and for making decisions at this point. But like I said in the beginning, this is really a work in progress. It will be really interesting if I come back in December, what I might tell you all about how this worked. But so far for the last 6 to 9 months since we've gotten this in place, I've been really pleased with how well we've been able to kind of come together as an organization from the top to the bottom, and just all of us understand where we're headed. And I love seeing the things on the roadmap being most of our strategic projects, getting those done, getting those through the system, and then kind of filling in the gaps with other things that may or may not be as strategic.
Well, thank you so much, Amber. We have one question from before was, how do you get beyond the approach that only sales counts?
Oh my gosh. I wish I knew, like that. I feel like sometimes that's what I fight the most within the organization, but I think that we've made really, really good strides. And I'll tell you about some of the things that I've done here and in the past. One of the reasons why I brought this team together and tried to even out the representation with folks across the company was to raise their voices a little bit more than just the sales team. And every time someone comes up with a question, and it's usually from sales, and I'm not, you know what, I get in trouble when I blame sales for things, but like a lot of times we'll get suggestions at the last minute, and it'll be kind of in a panicked way. And it'll be like, we've got to change the roadmap for this. This is a high priority item. I push them back to this process. So, hey, if this is really a big deal, we need to pull a product strategy ad hoc meeting right now so we can all talk about it. Hey, this is a really big thing that you want to add to the roadmap. here's a very clear view of what will be displaced because of it and where both of these things fit into our high level strategy, what gaps we're filling with both. So you tell me, is this really more important than the other thing that's on this roadmap? And that's probably my strategy for the foreseeable future, is just pushing back and trying to get everyone else to push back at using the process and seeing how the process works, because it's too hard, it's too easy for parts of the organization, sales, marketing, to come up with ideas, and it's not as easy for the product development team to turn them out. It takes a lot more time to actually build something. And I feel like it's part of my job to push back on these latest and greatest ideas and to help the teams figure out how to validate them. That's another piece. I've been asking a lot for data these days from our sales department. If they say, I've got a huge pipeline, or I've got all these customers that want this, we'll say, great, can you quantify how much money we're going to make? Can you get us in touch with the customers so that we can scope this feature appropriately and make sure that what we build is actually going to work for them? I don't always get a lot of the data back that I ask for, but then I don't put it on the roadmap. And I know that pisses them off, but I do feel like it's part of my job to make sure that we don't build something that isn't going to work for our customers. It is so much more expensive to do that than it is to dot our I's and cross our T's and look at the data up front, and even try to run a couple of prototypes or experiments ahead of time to validate that this is what our customers want. And so those are the two ways that I'm combating it, is like pushing back in the process, bringing that team together so we can discuss, and asking for data. And it's working. It's not always easy, but it is, I think it's the right thing to do. Thank you so much for having me. And like I said, I'm happy to answer more questions or talk more about like nitty-gritty details of how we've done any piece of this. And just thanks a lot for having me.